All right, that was a little Wagner there, which I thought was pretty cool. It's one of the reasons why I'm late tonight because I was editing that and this. What you're seeing behind me right now, we're going to go on a little journey tonight. Well, we're going to travel a little bit tonight. It's a little bit of a Sagittarian kind of mode. I'm in a post-eclipse kind of mood, so we're going to go on a little journey tonight. And of course, we have the lovely Rosie here, who is going to be joining us for the next. How long are you going to be up here? How long are you going to be up here for? Until I leave? What are you going to say? Something? You got something you want to say to people? Looks like you're going to just go right into that mic. Jasper's here too. He's just over on the other side. Yes, I know. It's your night. Thank you for being patient. I really did. I swear to God, I edited that video so I could take you on a. First of all, here's how that started. I wanted to play some music at the beginning of the show, and I guess it was last week. 2 weeks ago I played Holst. Pretty sure I played Holst 2 weeks ago, and I got in trouble. I got hit with a copyright claim for somebody who's been dead since 1934, which doesn't make any sense to me, particularly because there is a public domain copy that's available on Wiki Commons. It's not the same one that I did or used, rather. So anyway, I wanted to play more music. So I went on YouTube and I found the Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner. I'm like, man, I really like this piece of music. And I thought, well, I could just throw up a graphic and we could just listen to the graphic. But then I found that Hubble space thing. And I'd like to try to edit that again because there's actually like a culmination. There's like a denouement of the video that theoretically should also be in sync with the music. But it was pretty cool. I felt like it went together pretty nicely. So behind me now, we got a little bit of a fractal journey into space and beyond. That'll be kind of replaying over the course of tonight's show. Welcome. Welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight. I'm glad we're all here tonight. I hope everybody had an interesting and powerful eclipse. I got wiped out. My energy yesterday was like I was flattened. I was flattened. I didn't really rally until last night, and then boy, I was just completely. I was zonked. I was tired last night, and but I feel good today, and it's the weather out here is rather unusual. It's not sure whether it wants to be cold or warm, and also kind of humidity. Yeah, a lot of humidity, which I think is a byproduct of the geoengineering. Yeah, we're going to go on a little bit of a journey tonight. This thing's going to recycle a few times too. So if you miss it the first time, you'll see it again. So I hope everybody had a meaningful eclipse. And we're still in the eclipse wave, and we will be for the next 7.5 days. And of course, the eclipse took place on the U.S. ascendant. So we'll see how this thing plays out. It's always interesting when an eclipse happens on a weekend because the news cycle is very different on weekends. You know, we're dealing with different kinds of mundane factors that are released into the public sphere. During the week, it's like popcorn. It's just by the time you get to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's like, okay, we're going to shut down the propaganda machine for a few days. We'll crank it back up on Monday. One of the things that did happen was that Fredo got fired by CNN. And this is kind of eclipsy because his brother, Andrew, is a Sagittarius. And Andrew went through that South Node gate with his chart, which meant that he was going to be diminished or lesser, which is one of the big challenges that Sagittarian people have had over the last 18 and a half months, almost 19 months now. but they're going to be let off the hook, and it's time for Scorpios to walk the, what would say walk the plank? What is it? It's there's a terminology for it when you have to walk the it'll come to me. Anyway, it's Scorpio's time to be on the razor's edge. And Scorpio, hey, you know, South Nodes, you just roll with it, right? It's part of your codec. I do think if there's one sign that can handle a South Node moment, it's Scorpio. Honestly, because that's what Scorpio is. Like, give me the South Node. Give me the South Node and let me transform that motherfucker, right? That's how I see Scorpio in the South Node operate. That's the sign that's best suited, I think, for dealing with a South Node moment. Now, Taurus, on the other hand, with the true node in the moving in the sign, all you Tauruses out there, it's going to be Party City. Now, if I was a Taurus and the true node was coming into my sign, I know one thing. I would be very alert and aware about what I'd be putting in my body. I would definitely be aware of that, because there would be a tendency, I think, with Taurus to just go with that true node and go, just like, oh yeah, this is good. It's good, baby. I want more of this. I've been so deprived over the last 2 years. I just want more of this. So if you're a Taurus and you're coming into this nodal shift here, I mean, it'll be good for you. I mean, it'll be really good for you, because generally that's how it works, right? But I think if there's one sign, again, that could have a challenge with it, it would be like attachment to things and materiality and kind of an overabundance of sensuousness. You know, I mean, during a time like this, I mean, we live in these very weird kind of, strangely Spartan dystopic times where, you know, people are going to want to have sex in the metaverse. I mean, that's so anti-Taurus. It's not even funny. So maybe we need a little more Taurus in general, just to, you know, get down with our bodies and feel and touch and taste and reconnect with the earth. And I think Tauruses will help us do that for sure. Anyway, it's going to be an interesting ride. We're almost done with these nodes. And this is the last eclipse here with the sun in Sagittarius. And I believe it was at 14 degrees, if I'm not mistaken, right on the U.S. ascendant. I think the next few weeks are going to be interesting in terms of what happens here, because we know shit is going to hell in a handbasket in Europe. I'm going to talk a little bit about Europe tonight, mostly in the rearview mirror, in retrospect. And one of the things that I definitely wanted to look at tonight was this period in 1918, 1919, 1920, and even 1921. These are huge periods for history. And, you know, there's so much going on at that time. And we have the Treaty of Versailles, which I want to talk about tonight. And the two of the main characters, there were four main players in the Treaty of Versailles. One was the French tyrant Clemenceau, who was really a tyrant. For a Libra, the guy was about as nasty, a fascist. See, the thing with Clemenceau is he didn't really care what power structure. Clemenceau was interesting because he didn't care what power structure he was a part of. Like, if he wanted to go, the only thing that he cared about was he wanted to get the Alsace-Lorraine region back for France, which they had lost in a previous war. And he was tired of Napoleon III. So France was going through this major upheaval in terms of its own government during that time. And they wind up getting into this war with Germany and Kaiser Wilhelm, who's theoretically the last king of Germany/Prussia. And Clemenceau is he's the one thing I will say about Clemenceau is that he actually got into the trenches with his soldiers. Now, very few fucking prime ministers actually do that. And he knew that by doing that, he would raise the morale of his troops so that they would stay fighting longer against the Germans. It's actually pretty smart. So they became very devoted to this guy who was, an asshole, really. I mean, most people in power are assholes. Let's just be quite honest about it. But he was interesting. Like he was an interesting character amongst these. The least interesting is the Italian guy. He's almost a non-entity because you have these four leaders. They come together and we're going to look at that chart, by the way. The Treaty of Versailles chart. There are two of them, one when it's actually signed and one when it's enacted, and it changes history. That chart absolutely 100% changes history. And there are 14 points that are put together by the Wilson administration. And these 14 points will change the entire canon of history for the 20th century. And not for the better, by the way, for the worse. Now, at that time, Woodrow Wilson's being handled by Colonel Mandel House, who was his connection to people like Jacob Schiff and the Rothschild family. Because, I mean, Wilson is the guy who basically brings in central banking. Central banking, the Federal Reserve, it's all Wilson. He's basically blackmailed. Colonel House is his handler. House reports to the Rothschilds. He reports to Jacob Schiff. And Wilson is compromised. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to create a whole new world order back then. They had the League of Nations all set up. This was a big deal, right? Wilson was going to be the guy that was going to bring this new world order. And they actually kicked that phrase around, was New World Order. So what happens is that during that time, these 14 points that are basically drawn up by Wilson and his handlers are brought to the table to Treaty of Versailles. And the other guy who is a very important part of this, and he's really Wilson's counterpart, and they're both Capricorns. So that gives you an idea as to where the Treaty of Versailles is going. Like, it's being basically, out of the four people there, you had two Capricorns, a Libra and a Taurus. Clemenceau is the Libra. The American, Wilson, and the Englishman, Warner, Lord George Warner, if I'm not mistaken, he's also a Capricorn. They're kind of bookends. I think Wilson's at the end and Warner's at the beginning. But there's this Capricornian kind of directive that comes out of the Treaty of Versailles. And Warner was a piece of shit. But there's a reason why he wanted to do what he did with all these reparations. And they wanted the Germans to pay everything back. All these supposed losses that happened during World War I. Bankrupts Germany. Completely bankrupts Germany. They're bringing the Weimar Republic. But there's a reason why they did that. And the reason why is they wanted to take that money, and they're just chopping everything. They're chopping everything up. They're chopping up, Poland gets born during that time, right? I mean, there's no Poland prior to the end of World War I. It's all part of the, Austro-Hungarian Empire, with the Prussians and Habsburgs. And so World War I comes in and just starts slicing and dicing all these countries. Slovenia and all these Baltic countries get their own designation as countries at that point in time. But it doesn't last for very long. It only lasts until really World War II, and then the Russians come in and they chop it all up all over again. But the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, which was outside of Turkey, like they lose territory. They totally lose territory. So this is setting the stage for what we call Mandate Israel. And that money, that reparation money, was supposed to go towards the Zionist Congress so that they could take that money and go build the new Israel or Palestine, which was a big part of World War I. Huge, very significant. And of course, most of the upper middle class and really wealthy Jews in Western Europe said, I'm not moving there. Are you fucking kidding me? Look what I got here. I got game here. I got a department store. I got all these, what does that say? What does that say? I've never seen this before. some text back there. They didn't want to go. They're like, screw that. You know, we're not into the Wild West or the Wild East. So then you have World War II. That's a whole other story. But that's where a lot of the money. And George Warner, this guy, this Brit, the Capricorn, he wants that money repaid so they can, you know, take the booty and use some of that so they can take care of this new mandate. Palestine is what they called it at the time. It was named Israel. It's a big deal, and it bankrupts the Germans financially, morally, and it sets the stage for the rise of Hitler and National Socialism. This is what happens. And if they hadn't hit the Germans with such hard reparations, who knows? There's a really good chance there would have been no Hitler. Nobody would have been able to rise in that economic, emotional decay. Really, I mean, Germany was it was horrible. You know, inflation was nuts. Starting to sound a little familiar here, by any chance? Are you starting to get the picture? You know, what is America going to have to pay back in terms of reparations? See, this is a really interesting question. You know, if America is one of the greatest abusers of climate, think about that. If America is one of the greatest abusers of climate, and they're able to determine that the state of the world's climate is really due to the fact that we have so many cars and we have so much production, theoretically, right? That we've caused it, and we also have to now we have to provide reparations for all the damage that's been done to the climate. The model's already there. You know, the model, and we're already seeing the inflation. We're seeing this fifth generational warfare on our economy, but it's not just here. It's going to happen worldwide. Well, mostly worldwide. Other places, not so much. Oh, that's pretty trippy, huh? Look at that. Okay, now we're into the DMT phase of this thing. That's what it's looking like. I'm just going on this drive. I've never seen this before. I like tapped into it. I watch it for a little bit. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So we're on this journey together, literally and figuratively. Oh yeah, we're definitely in DMT land now. We're in some inner space. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to go back in time. We're going to look at some of the things that happened then. We're going to look at the two charts for the Treaty of Versailles and also those 14 points, which are pretty significant. And so when we talk about astrology, we talk about mundane astrology, we look at it in historical terms and how did things happen and why did they happen? And, you know, could we assign value of what took place during a period of time? And that's clearly yes. We look at the two people that were the main drivers of the Treaty of Versailles, which were Wilson and Lloyd George, and their Capricorns. We look at the two charts, the one for when it was written and the one from when it came into power, right? The enactment of it, basically about a year apart. So the first chart is Cancerian, and I'll show you that. The second chart is Capricorn. So the two of them fit together in a very interesting way. Tonight, we're also going to go way back in time, and we're going to look at some conjunctions, some great conjunctions. And there are two in particular that we're going to look at and how they relate to climate, because it seems like we're in a 400-year climate cycle that is essentially, this is what it feels like to me, that it seems connected to these great conjunctions. Not all great conjunctions are connected to climate, but the three that I'm going to be looking at are, and the reason why is because we have two bookend conjunctions, great conjunctions, Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, with the one right in the center in Leo. So we're going to look at those, and we're going to look at what was happening during that time, and also with some more mechanics around these great conjunctions, because when Saturn moves off the great conjunction, you know, when it goes to the first square of the great conjunction, you kind of get to see where you are with applying this kind of new Saturnian element in your chart. And everybody's going through it, right? Everybody has a place in their chart where that great conjunction happened. For some people, like we're spot on certain planets. I know one of my, I wouldn't call him a student, but somebody who I've worked with a little bit, true node, Aquarius, 0 degrees. Like, so for the next 20 years, I mean, that's a pretty interesting cycle for that, individual to be going through that. Then you would look at the first square to that Saturn conjunction of the true node, which would be in the sign of Taurus. That's going to be a ways from now. It's going to be that first, where we are now with these transits of Saturn with the fixed signs this is it. Like, this is the alchemical period that we're in now. This next Saturn cycle, I guess you could maybe go back to 2000, right around there, where we had Jupiter, Saturn, and Taurus. Again, part of this fixed cycle. Definitely. I mean, that was the last super conjunction that we had in before this one in Aquarius. So we're dealing, right? We're dealing with these fixed Saturn transits. So we have Saturn, which will be in Taurus next, and it will actually be at the same spot that it was when it was, I think, around, what was it, 2000? I think it was right around, I have to go back, I think around 2000. And so that period would come to an end, right? Everything that started with that great conjunction in 2000, here, I'll go look at it. Give me 1 second. I'm supposed to be exact here. So let's see what we have here. By the way, welcome. I'm going to jump into Chatlandia here in a minute so I can say hi to you guys. Let's see. There it is. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Let's see. What do we have? Yeah, May, June 2000. Jupiter, Saturn were conjunct in Taurus at 2324. So that's also a really interesting piece for people now, because now we're at that first Saturn square to Saturn. Well, we're not quite there yet. We will be, though. We'll be there by the end of 2022, right? So you get to kind of look at what was going on in your life in 2000. And a lot of, for a lot of people, there were financial themes in 2000, 23, 24. It was kind of right, very close to Algol. Algol is what, at 25, 26. So that conjunction is very, very close to Algol. And it's right. That conjunction takes place right before, let's say, April, May. It's right around the time of the .com collapse. Because that happened in April, I believe, of 2000. And because I was there, I watched the whole damn thing happen. I was in .com. And so you have this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which is interesting because it was like the people that had made the money in the .com world, they're getting out, right? They're getting out, and they'd already gotten out. The people that got all the founder shares, they're out. They're cashing in, and everybody else is dealing with Saturn, right? So you can see the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction right around then. But for you want to look at where 23, 24 Taurus is in your chart, because that started a particular cycle, and we're kind of in that cycle now, right? We're in that cycle now, and we're dealing with another Saturn square coming up at the end of 2023. So you can look back and see where your life has been. How have you, quote unquote, improved? It's a while, we're talking about 23, 20, no, it's more than that. I mean, we're 20 years now, and that's going to be 3, 6, 9, that's a ways away. It's like 11 years from now. 11 years from now. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot less of us 11 years from now to be comparing these notes. Just an intuitive hunch here. So I think now would be kind of a more reasonable time because we're moving into a square, right? We're moving into that first big square here with the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. So 20 years later, right? How's your life? What's going on with it? But it won't be until next year. And here's where it's going to get interesting because you're dealing with like resources. We're dealing with resources during that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. A lot of people were making a lot of money. A lot of people were losing money during that time, right? And then there's this huge kind of thing that happens a year later called 9/11, all in this process of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. So it'll be, and that's where we start to have these collective moments. Really collective. I mean, prior to that, we would have collective moments. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we had them, and I've talked about them before, but that's a huge one. That's really something. And it's a collective moment for us here in this country and also people around the world because it was a world event. And it, in a lot of ways, it moves us towards where we are now with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Because if you think of the World Trade Center, right, it's these giant twins that are consecrated towards banking and finance and industry. Like these are the twin titans that represent this kind of monolithic growth in approach to Western civilization. New York, of course, being sort of the epitome of that. And it all comes tumbling down. I'm not going to get into it too much, but you know the story, or at least you know what I think of the story. And then out of that, what do we have? We have the one world Freedom Tower. And when we think about one world, we think about Aquarius, right? We think about the Aquarian age, one world, one planet, one people. At the one world Freedom Tower, it looks like a massive hypodermic needle. And this is what happens, right? These two monolithic twin titans that represent growth and power and economy and the sort of the epitome of the Western ascent, they all come tumbling down and replaced by one monolithic structure, one tower to rule them all. And that all happens during this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, that 20-year cycle. So here we are 20 years later, and what's the message now? Well, greed isn't good anymore, is it? No, it's about the greater good. Remember how greed was good? Now the greater good is good. And we move into Aquarius with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And these are the dynamics and the issues that will be sorted out. And when Saturn hits 23, 24 degrees, it'll be square to when the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the last great conjunction, takes place. It'll be certainly at the end of 2022. And it'll be dancing around it in 2023. But that's going to be an interesting time because we'll have to deal with this highly unfortunate imposition of Saturn, which has been top down from day one, ever since it went into Aquarius. And the square to that Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, to me, does not bode well because it has to do with money, it has to do with finance, it has to do with a lot less. And everything that is valued as a resource needs to be channeled and funneled into this new plan. That's what it feels like to me. And so we're going to get to see that at the end of 2022 when Saturn moves into that square with the first Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So for us now, as we're moving through this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction together, we'll also see, was 11 years out from this time, right, where we are. And it's going to be a really powerful time. I mean, I think, once we get out to 2029, 2030, we're really in a different world, a very, very different world. and a world, in my estimation, that we have actually a much better shot at living in a way that's going to be more conducive to really grounded structures and values after, we go into this phase in 2025, when Saturn moves into Aries and it conjuncts Neptune, and every time we see a Saturn Neptune conjunction, I've talked about this before, in most cases we see the rise of socialism, and structures dissolve, order dissolves. In Aries, we're talking about potentially really fascist energy, supremely fascist energy in Aries. There could also be some interesting developments around men during that time. Like, I think men might actually make a comeback during that time. I think actually men are going to make a comeback starting in April of next year, when Mars comes back into the sky. It's visible and we can see it in Aries. But that Saturn-Neptune conjunction is going to be pretty interesting. Of course, that's around the time of the Great American Eclipse. And then everything is fire and air. It's all fire and air. Uranus is in Gemini, Neptune's in Aries, Pluto's in Aquarius, Saturn's in Aries. I mean, it is fire and air. It is vulcanized. It is vulcanized from then until 2030. And finally, we get some movement. Saturn goes into Taurus and we hit ground again. So out of that period of like intense vulcanization, where it's going to be a complete and utter like sci-fi movie. That's my sense of it. Like, I'm not even sure we can really wrap our heads around where it's going to go. I think we can speculate and we can peek around to the metaverse and we can begin to make some associations of being connected up to the metaverse, and people will be these more kind of cyborg-like beings and controlled by AI, and the whatever kind of nanotech is floating around our bloodstreams, and telling people whether or not we've got high blood pressure or high glyceride counts. I mean, that's all on the table, by the way. That's not speculative. That's all on the table. And we can see into that. We can see into the internet of bodies, the internet of senses, the internet of perceptions. I mean, once we get out of the internet, we get into the internet of things, it just becomes fractal. And there's kind of like this iteration of the internet for just about everything. And it's all on the table, and it's all being observed and analyzed and modified in an omnipresent, real-time and virtual situation. And to think about that and to try to wrap your head around that is challenging. It's really challenging. Now, I think there could be some interesting things that come out of it, some cool things that could come out of it. We'll talk about some of those things tonight. But we're going to go into a place that we've never been before. And we talk about resets. I've talked about resets a lot. John Levi's got a new episode up today about terminals and train stations. And terminals and train stations, to me, are like portals. I think it's isn't it take place? Where is it? Is it La Jetée? The end of La Jetée. Is he at a train station? Or is he at an airport? I'd have to go back and look at it. La Jetée, that's the great time travel movie by Chris Marker. And it's all done with slides. It's all done with it's a guy that comes back. 12 Monkeys is based on La Jetée. If you haven't seen it, it's great. It's very dark, but it's great. And I actually showed that to these kids one time when I was doing after school programs. I was like, oh, look at these cool films we can get. Oh, hey, La Jetée, let me get that one. And honestly, I had never seen it before. I'm like, oh, this cool movie about time travel. Let me show the kids. And, it's kind of dark. I have to say, it's kind of a dark film. And who knows, maybe some kid was impacted by it. What do you think, Rosie? Yeah. Anyway, we're going to look at this great conjunction tonight. Again, we're going to kind of revisit it. And the reason I want to revisit are these two specific times that are connected to climate. It's some pretty interesting events that happened during these two great conjunctions. So we got that on the table tonight. We've got some Treaty of Versailles stuff, World War I. I guess I have the chart for this Ursula von der Leyen, the lead witch of the EU. I have her chart. I decided to look at it. It's a very, how do I say this? It's an unimpressive chart. I'm going to just come out. It's an unimpressive chart for somebody who I think is pretty unimpressive in general. We can take a look at that. And of course, we have the chart of the moment. All right. Enough of me ranting here. And let me see how you guys are doing. Okay, there you go, Marianne. Good to see you. PB's here. Thor by the doors of my man Steve. Looks like we got a Benito sighting. What's going on, Benito? Speaking of DMT, the shadow man. Ryan, the introspective woodworker. What's going on, brother? Natasha, I always have fun checking for places. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. Lon, what's going on, Londa? Jan, Emily, I haven't seen the show in months. Well, I haven't seen you in months either, Jan. We've been around. We've just been on other channels. Jamie, RCA Cat. WC Ray, Eclipse was on my birthday. Wow. Cool. The weather outside is frightful. Some places it is. I heard snowing in Buffalo. Yeah. Birthday on an eclipse. It happened to my son one time. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever witnessed. He went through complete personality change. Complete personality change. It was weird. Very weird. Let's see. Who else do we have here? Gigi AB Land. What's going on, Gigi? Sony is here. There's my girl Fran. What's going on, Cece? Good to see you. Nevad 17. Background is making me motion sick. Oh, I'm sorry. I just can't handle physically the moving at me. Total vertigo. You guys want me to get rid of the background? Is it too much for you? Is it too much? I can change it. Here, let me change it. If you guys are having an issue with it, I'll change it. I'm here for you. I'll change it for you. We'll get something a little less motiony. How's that? Here we go. You guys can just look at the electric blue. How's that? The all-seeing indigo eye. Is that better? I don't want to lose anybody here. Agree, Scorpio knows the razor's edge. Yep. Lately, I've not been, hey, it's Kato, not been able to tolerate alcohol or sugar. It's getting harder for people to process those things. Scorpio or airways made out to be negative, are always made up to be. Yeah, I agree with that. They get a bad rap. My progressed ascendant is in Scorpio. Oh, you got some lessons. What about a person that's a South Node in Taurus? Well, you get to get balanced out here. You get to get balanced out. That's how I think of the nodes. When you have that halfway mark, that synodic cycle of the nodes, the lesser is made greater and the greater is made lesser. You are a good person, Kelly B. I'd agree with that. Let's see. There are some terrible Scorps. Brand, yes, he is a bad Scorp. So is Hillary. Hillary's a Scorpio. What's going on? There's Rob Chopra. Rob's in the house tonight. What else do we have here? Let's see. You're on a roll. I'm like, oh, hey, what's going on, Lupicius? Good to see you. Let's see, what else do we have here? Squirrel. What's going on, Jen? Nice to see you inside the Sunday night. Space, Wiggy. Wiggy's here. Wendy Quintana. I haven't seen Wendy in a while. A lot of people haven't seen her. There's Zach Grun. You like the background. I changed it there, Zach. People were like kind of tripping out. There's my man, David. What's going on, brother? Good to see you. The Leo King in the freaking house. There he is. Lana says, my son and I are Neptune composite at 0. Ooh, interesting. Wow, that makes a lot of sense, Lana. Now that I know a little bit about your story, which is pretty heavy. That makes some sense. Susie Gemini's here. Who else do we have? And Uranus was an Aquarius squaring. That's right. David, man, you are a rock solid wing guy. Well, you're more than a wing guy, but thank you for that. Appreciate that. Snake Jones, what's going on? Shannon, brother. Shirley Schiavo. Ani, the wench with the wrench. Good to see you, Ani. You keep popping up on my YouTube screen since I subscribed to your channel. I keep seeing your videos pop up. I haven't seen any new videos, but your old ones pop up. How are you? Good to see you. Another Sagittarius. Beaming in. Fender Bender. There's Charles Mazak. What's going on, Charles? Funny how Jupiter/Neptune is happening to 23 Pisces, and that it's going to be propagated as don't look at what's happening. Right? Absolutely. That's going to be an interesting time. That Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, wow. To me, that feels, you know what that feels like to me? That feels like it's setting the stage for guess who? The AC. Speaking of the AC, I wanted to show you guys something. Because I talked about this. This guy was part of my stream a couple of weeks ago when I was getting into the whole Travis Scott stuff. And I want you to take a look at this. Take a look at this. It is not so subliminal. And look who's here now. Come on up. Let's go. Your turn. Time to Walk with Prince William. So apparently he's got a podcast now on Apple. Now, this podcast could have been anything, right? It could have been, strong tea with Prince William. Share a fag with Prince William. Could have been anything. But it's time to walk with Prince William. It's nice and green too, isn't it? You see the green silhouette. I'm sorry, the silhouette inside the green circle there. I wonder what's going on there. Well, first of all, I think it's a message. Like the message is, hey, it's time to walk with this guy. It's time to walk with him. This is your new Lord and Savior, right? This is how this is how they are going to promote him, right? Who else do you walk with? You walk with Jesus, don't you? It's time to walk with Jesus. It's time to walk with Prince William. And it's on Apple. Oh, it's fitness. Okay. I get it. Why the fuck would Prince William and Apple be interested in a walking video with him? Honestly, they really wouldn't. Because most people don't give a shit about Prince William, at least not now. They might a year from now, 2 years from now, maybe when next year when Jupiter conjuncts Neptune and Pisces, all of a sudden people might find them caring a lot about Prince William and not knowing why. And by the way, they can make that happen. They can totally make that happen. They can adjust harmonics and vibration. And I remember watching George Bush back in the early 2000s, right around 2004, 2005, 2000. I hated that son of a bitch. I couldn't stand him. And yet when he would do these Rose Garden talks or whatever, I found myself like feeling all kinds of weird elation. It was strange. And I was watching myself feeling this weird elation. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, this is such a disconnect about how I feel about this guy. And my gut told me that there was a different frequency that they were beaming. Like, they could dial up, you know, the Hewlett-Clark method. What is joy? What is the frequency for joy? All right, let's do that. Let's dial up the frequency for joy and let's punch it. Let's take that analog network that we've taken down, no longer using it. We'll punch it through the analog network. So everybody that's watching Bush will feel a sense of joy when they watch him. It was weird. It was cognitively dissonant. I remember at some point I had to turn the TV off because it almost felt like I was being possessed by this weird emotion that did not align with really how I felt about the guy. So I think they could absolutely do that with Prince William. Once they get 5G up and running and they've got enough people jacked into the network. Oh my God, Prince William. Let's walk with Prince William. Let's walk with him. All right. What else we got going on here? Where are we? Where are we, Jasper? Where in space are we? Let's see. Soul speak frequencies. The socialists in Australia are nuts. They're busy protesting against anyone who's protesting against gov jab mandates, the current segregation against the jab and not jab, calling us fascists. It's totally bizarre. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever encountered. And I've seen some bizarre shit, but not as a group. Like, not as a group. And so this is a guy, what's his name? Martinson, Chris Martinson, was talking to this guy, Matthias, who is this PhD researcher, and he has this thing on mass hypnosis. And he gets in, now he's been around a few shows, and he gets into this condition of mass hypnosis and how it occurs. And one of the things that happens with mass hypnosis is that people are isolated, right? They have a sense of isolation. So where have we seen isolation? Well, we saw it during the first few weeks of the quote unquote crisis, right? People were put into isolation, but they've been working on isolating people for a while now, and not just in spaces. They've been working on isolating people emotionally, mentally, psychologically. They've just been creating wider and wider gaps and spaces between people. This is what they've been doing. And it's done through ideology. That's number one. It's done through ideology. And ideology is separation. And separation helps create anger. It helps create anger. Separation helps create anger. When you're angry, you feel separate from things, don't you? I do. When I'm really angry, what's the only thing that I connect with? I connect with my anger and this thing that I'm driving with my anger. I'm not separate from that. Or maybe I'm not separate from me and the person I'm directing my anger towards, but everything else gets kind of blotted out, right? It just gets blotted out. And when you're not angry, when you're at peace or you're calm, or your brainwave is nice and smooth, your breathing's nice, are you separate? No, you feel connection with things. You feel connection with people. You feel connection with nature. You feel more kind of holistic relationship because you don't have to focus, right? You're not in a fight or flight mode. And when you're in fight or flight mode, it creates separation. It's just the way it is. You have to separate yourself from your circumstances so that you can survive. That's how anger works. Anger begets separation. Separation begets anger. The two become part of this spinning dynamic. So what do you create? You create a bunch of angry people. And that anger was already being percolated prior to all of this. Is being percolated prior to all of this. You know, they were morphing the social condition, and it's been ongoing for quite a while. You know, we're now coming up on the 50-year anniversary of Chiron and Aries, and the last time Chiron and Aries, and I've talked about this before, really was 1968, and it was one of the most bloody times in modern history. You had the Vietnam War really at its height in 1968. A bad scene. You had the Democratic Convention in Chicago. I mean, it's you've got riots going on in Paris, the revolution in Paris. 68 and 69 are just really bloody times with Chiron and Aries. And then you have the Weather Underground and all the strife on the American campuses. Not just America, it's happening everywhere. And so so that's when all of this stuff really starts to take off, right? It all starts to take off, and the people that were the architects, of that anger, of that revolutionary radical movement, they go underground for a while, then they resurface. And once they resurface, what do? They start to impact the American educational system, and not just the American educational system, but also education around the world, but clearly in the United States. And it all starts when Chiron and Aries surfaces. So what happens now? Well, we have this curriculum in American schools, which it started off in universities, and now it's trickled down into grade schools, right? The same kind of ideology, which is essentially this Marxist ideology, and it's trickled down now, right? The social Marxist ideology, it's trickled down into grade school, right? They just said, okay, we're just gonna, we're gonna ice bucket challenge this thing. We're just gonna turn everything upside down, and we're gonna let all the contents out. And that's exactly what they've done. And so what happens is that you create a group of individuals who are told that they're oppressed. They are oppressed, and there's a reason why they're oppressed. And so when they get that message as to why they're oppressed, what do? Well, they want to take out their oppressors. They're angry. Well, you fucked this up, and you fucked this up, and you fucked that up, and this is why this has happened, and you're to blame. So we got to take you out, right? You need to go. Yet you can grovel all you want, but at the end of the day, your ticket is out of here. And this is what's happened. It created and fomented anger. And when you have anger, you have separation. And so when you have separation, you have isolation. When you have isolation, people are prone to what? Mass hypnosis. It's exactly what this guy Matthias is saying. So the mass hypnosis experience they've been grooming people for this, right? They've been grooming them. Separation, isolation, existentialism, nihilism. There's no meaning, right? Nothing has any meaning. The only thing that has meaning is the critical dialectic that will be able to dissect the system of your oppressors. And then you could use that as a tool to theoretically, philosophically, or intellectually oppress the other people who don't understand what the fuck you're talking about. So this is what's happened ultimately. And then when we got to last year, we got into the real physical isolation phase. And that was the kicker moment, right? That was it. That's when all these people that were on the edge and already feeling isolated and alienated and now being really shoved into that isolated and alienated place. And I talked about this with the Janus ritual, we're still part of it. But what happens is that all of a sudden now they need a sense of belonging. They need a sense of being with somebody or having a cause. And that's exactly what happened. We saw that. It's like, okay, there are a bunch of people who are here to be a part of the greater good. Remember, Saturn was in Aquarius before it hooked up with Jupiter, right? It was in Aquarius and went back into Capricorn. And it was in Aquarius when we were locked down. And that's a really important thing to wrap your head around, because that's when the top-down directive started to make itself imprinted upon people. And that's when people began to feel a sense of a cause, right? Some people felt a real cause. And for a lot of people, keep this in mind now, for a lot of people who'd been alienated and isolated, nihilistic and godless in a lot of ways, now all of a sudden they have a cause. And their cause is to support the greater good. wear the mask, get the jabs, and be a soldier for those that aren't, right? Like they've been turned loose. Now they're the soldiers. They're the sentries of that system. And they did it ultimately because number one, they're angry and disaffected. Number two, they were isolated, either isolated in their position and their human condition, and then isolated physically. And it's like, okay, if I want to come back into society, this is what I have to do. And so you have a group of people who are all, vibrationally attuned at that time to the same kind of social need, same kind of social and individual need. So they will enter back in. They'll enter back in now with a purpose. And that purpose is being essentially conducted by this mass hypnosis. So this is what's happened. And this is why you're going through hell in Australia. And I'm sorry for that. And that hell has been unleashed all across the planet. Australia is not the only one, but it's really taken root, real intense root over the last, I don't know. When could we really make a claim for that? Oh, God. I think when we had Saturn and Pluto, with that Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, it really felt like there were people who, and by the way, it wasn't just one group, that there were people that were tired of the system. The system, whether it's, the capitalist corporate system that is oppressed mainly by white males, or whether it is the system that's reflected the system that I'm talking about, because there are other people who are feeling the same thing. But we hit that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and that's really where all this gets kicked off, is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And it was at 25 Capricorn. That's when it all kicks off. And that's when I feel like this moment, right? This moment takes place and everything changes, time stops, and people are now being guided and directed by their disaffection for the system. And if you were disaffected already prior to that, and part of your disaffection was the corporate capitalist, white male dominated system, then that Saturn-Pluto conjunction is a real sea change, because at that point you've probably had enough, right? You've had enough. And then this event comes along and it triggers a bunch of people who are like, okay, this is it. We're going to do this. And they don't care at that point. Like they don't really care. It doesn't really matter what the issue is. I mean, it kind of does, but the issue is really just it's just a cover, right? It's a cover for destruction and the destruction of a system. And that's Pluto-Saturn conjunction. And then you have people on the right who are feeling the same thing. The people on the right were just like sick and fucking tired of shit. And they're like, we're tired of this. We're tired of you kicking Trump around. And every day he's got to fight the press. He's got to fight Congress. He's got to fight Pelosi, right? All that's going on. And a lot of people are like, hey, look, we voted for this guy. Let him fucking do his job, right? So a lot of people were pissed off at that. Saturn-Pluto conjunction, they probably had enough too. That was all happening, right? That whole sea change is happening right there. And then boom, here comes, the Corona train. And that's it. The Corona train is really that Saturn-Pluto conjunction. There's a before and an after the world. And, I talked about it. I talked to, this is, this event is coming and there's going to be a before and an after, and we're living in the after now. So that event, I think, really catalyzed, the folks that you're talking about, not just in Australia. Like it was already happening, right? And then we move into the summer of Floyd, and we have the true node, and then the true node just really splits everything like an atom. Everything just gets split like an atom. So it doesn't really matter now. I mean, you can't even have conversations with people. You can't. It's almost nearly impossible to have a reasonable, rational conversation. because people get triggered or whatever, whatever the narrative is. So I feel for you. I'm sorry you're having to go through that. You're not getting any help from your government. In fact, you're actually being put in a much worse place. And if I had just fuck you money, real big fuck you money, I would do everything in my power to help a country like Australia. I'd like Bogrites this thing. I'd get 1,500 really skilled and qualified people and pay a private visit to Australia. Let's put it that way. And I wish, I just wish there was more of a sentiment in the world. And I'm sorry. It's just terrible. And now the contagion, and I'm not even talking about the contagion that you're being oppressed by. The contagion you're being oppressed by is not the contagion that they say you're being oppressed by. The contagion you're being oppressed by is the contagion of oppression. And now that's spreading globally. And this is what we're having to deal with now. So this is it. You are here. You are at ground zero. You're at ground zero for this, this movie. I mean, you are ground zero for this movie of transformation and redemption and the end of ages. I mean, think about it. It's pretty fucking epic if you really wrap your head around it. It's not always easy, but I mean, it's pretty fucking epic. And every now and then it's pretty funny, and more than every now and then it's pretty tragic. There's, if you cruise through the Twitter feed and some of these other news streams and you see what's happening to a lot of young people now, it's terrible. And you know what I'm talking about, right? It's terrible. And the hard part is the abject denial. And I think that has a lot to do also with Saturn and Aquarius, which is very detached and very cool and very scientific. I feel like that's added to a lot of the hardcore institutional denial around what's really happening. And getting back to what David was saying about Jupiter and Pisces, I feel like the Jupiter and Pisces and Neptune in Pisces conjunction could be really powerful. I mean, to me, it reeks of illusion, and it just reeks of all kinds of, high magic, strange magic. But it also has this potential of, here's what I think about humanity. I feel like, especially in the West, really in the West, I was watching a YouTube video, this guy who does this extreme travel, and he was hanging out in Pakistan. These motherfuckers are happy. They're happy in Pakistan. Hardly anybody was wearing a mask. They didn't have a ton of money to run around scooters. They're eating street food. I mean, they were happy. They're saying hi to the guy, welcome. And I know Pakistan has issues, and certainly Afghanistan has issues, but the West, I'm really going to talk about the West. The West has a lot of issues, and the West has a lot of grief. I mean, there's a ton of grief that we have to go through. We have to experience as a species in the West. We have to go through it. It has nothing to do with depression, has nothing to do with, anger, maybe, because if you get to anger and go through your anger, you will get to grief. We're not there yet, though. Like if we all got like intensely angry without, going postal, but if we all got intensely angry, we would break through that anger and we would hit grief and we would bottom out. If we really, really, really got really super pissed off and enraged at the system and what it's doing and how it's fucking with people and how it's really harming people in terms of their choices and their health and their identity, we would push through that and we would come to grief. And if we came to grief, we would hit a net zero. We would flatten out. We would absolutely flatten out. We'd look around at each other and we'd say, what the fuck is going on here? What is going on here? How did we get here? How did we get here? How did we allow this to happen? And more importantly, how do we stop it? And how do we not allow it from ever happening again? But what happens is we get just ripped along this roller coaster ride of events and media, and it takes us out of any true feeling potential. I mean, ultimately, that's if we're going to go somewhere and we're going to solve this thing, we have to get to that point. We cannot. We're not going to be able to create something new until we completely cleanse the really, to understand it's the human condition. It is the human condition, and it's what we've done to each other, and it's what we've allowed others to do to us. And once, if we can have that moment, right, we're gonna be really fucking pissed off. And you get through that, you bust through that, and then all of a sudden the dam breaks, and nobody owns you anymore after that. They just don't own you anymore. You're free, totally free. And then we can sit back and just, without any kind of reaction, say, no, we're not interested. We're not interested in this anymore. And the majority of the people could do that. Doesn't have to be everybody, a majority of people do that, and the game stops. It just energetically, it just stops. So I think in order for us to really get to that point, and maybe the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, gets us to that place where we can have that moment. The only problem is that every time we have that moment, somebody's going to come along and basically take advantage of it. That's usually what happens. Oh, trauma here. Let's insert a little program, right? That's how it works. All right, let's take a quick look at the chart of the moment. Let's just say prayer here. Let's just say a little prayer here for all of our friends around the planet who are undergoing extremely oppressive situations, extremely oppressive rules and regulations. And I'm sure a number of these folks are in fear as to how they're going to live, how they're going to survive, what's going to happen to them in the face of this oppression. And so I just want to say a prayer to each and every one of you out there to know that you're not alone, and that you're all part of our family, and that we love you, and that you're part of the family of God and the Most High, and that we're all one, and we're all with you together. And you will get through it. And you need to stay strong, and you need to hold your ground, because that's the most important thing you can do. And there will be a time when we will be through this and on the other side. And I hope all of us are there together to be a part of it. All right. Let's get into the chart of the moment. Let's check out what we got, and then we're going to go do some time travel. All right. Let's see. All right. Who's this? Oh, 1226. Okay. Let me do a new tab. Do you guys like that Wagner at the beginning? Is that cool? I remember seeing that Apocalypse Now for the first time. I was stoned out of my mind. I think it was in the third row. It was one of the big theaters, one of the big cinemas in San Francisco. It was like a third row from the front. I was not the same person after that movie. But that scene was something else. Let me tell you. Now, where is this? That'll work. We've moved into Leo. Leo rising. That's my man David's rising sign right there, Leo rising. All right, here we go. We have just coming out of this eclipse, Sun, Mercury conjunction, squaring Neptune. Ooh. We're coming into that that religious persecution square. Wow. Be careful what you say. I should have probably looked at this before I started the show tonight. Be careful what you say over the next few days. And if you're going to say anything, say the truth. Don't fucking lie. Not now. Not with a Mercury Neptune square. Don't fucking lie. It's not going to work out well. Don't lie to yourself. Don't lie to other people. Don't fall for other people's lies. This is like a big, big aspect. It's a major aspect. And then we've got a Sun Neptune square. Boy, that to me, man, that is demoralizing, right? Keep your spirits up. Whatever happens over the next week, you got to keep your spirits up. It's very important. Extremely important. We got Mars at 24 Scorpio, so we're 6 degrees away from it, moving into Sagittarius. And right now, Mars is in trine with Neptune and will be for the next 4 days in a nice tight trine. That's really good for creativity. So if you're, I don't know, if you're creatively inclined, you want to make somebody a Christmas gift or a holiday gift or whatever you're celebrating this time of year. If you're celebrating Mars Neptune square, it's Mars Neptune trine, very good for stuff like that, right? Really good. Mars and Scorpio is always good for sex. Trining with Mars, hot, soulful sex. You're in a position to experience that. Hey, why not? It's starting to separate a little bit, right? Mars is at 24, so we have the sweet spot. So over the course of the next few days, it'll still be in that trine. We're talking about what, by Wednesday, Thursday, it's really starting to separate, move away. But I like it. For me, this is one of the better aspects of this week's chart. Mars sextile Pluto, Mars sextile Venus. I guess we're coming up on a Venus retrograde pretty soon here. So if you're determined about something, okay, let me say this. This is a week where action is better than words. Action is better than words. You got Mars, sextile Venus, sextile Pluto, trining Neptune. Engage, right? It's better to engage and do something than to talk about it. That's my that's my coda for this week. Act versus talk, for sure. Act versus talk. Especially tomorrow. Like I think tomorrow would be a good day if you want to actualize and put something in motion. Tomorrow would be a pretty good day. Whatever that thing is. Whatever that thing is. Even though Mars is in Scorpio here. We get a bit of a peak of Mars, I think, when in December. When it's in Sagittarius, I think Mars comes out just a little bit and then goes back behind the sun again. We've got Moon in lovely Capricorn. Trine Uranus. Try on some new emotions. Try on some new emotions. Yeah. Also, look at your family, right? Because the moon represents your family. We're coming into this family season. And look at your family in a different kind of way. Maybe you have more extended family. Maybe you have more an Aquarian family. Maybe you have more of a Uranian family. Remember, also, it doesn't take a village to be a family. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 people, right? I mean, that's Moon in Capricorn. It's not a huge family. It's not like Moon in Cancer. You have a big family, or Moon in Leo, like big family, lots of kids. Moon in Capricorn limits the whole thing. But it's still potent here, right? It's in that nice trine with Uranus. So think about your family in different terms. And remember, it's quality, not quantity. We're getting close to Venus, Pluto right there, really close to conjunction. Nice sextile with Neptune. And kindness is the order of the day here. You can, to me, this is magical, right? This little Venus-Pluto conjunction just before Venus goes retrograde. Sextile Neptune, you got Mars kicking in there. That's magic. Make some magic happen. Make some magic happen. Be kind. Around this time of year, I always try to make a little magic happen. Usually I try to, help somebody out every now and then, right around this time of year, because it feels good. So make a little magic happen. In the face of all that is, make a little magic happen. That's probably the most revolutionary thing you can do, by the way, is to make a little magic happen. Think about that. All right, what else do we have? Saturn. We got Saturn, in that long square with Uranus still slagging along, right? It is the resistance. And by the end of the year, we're going to be really close to that Saturn-Uranus square. That'll be interesting. Definitely interesting. As the Saturnian forces do their best to radically impose new limitations under the guise of the greater good, while the people of Earth, in their Uranian state of rebellion, push back against these so-called rules and regulations, all for our greatest good. It's going to be interesting. It's part of the dynamic tension and process. It's going to be going on for a while. So figure out how you can be both what? You can be both Saturnian, which means you take care of business, you stay in the game, and Uranian, which means that you remain independent and free. So it's a friction, it's a dynamic, it's forcing you to do that. It's forcing us to do that. Okay. We can learn things from these squares. The final degrees of the true node in Gemini. I'd like to say it's been fun. It has. I like the true node in Gemini. I like Gemini. I think Gemini is really interesting. A lot of people say that I don't like Gemini. That's not true. That is really not true. I like Gemini. Interesting people. All 10 of them. Because there's only really 10 Geminis. Everybody else is, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, that's the chart of the moment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. I think we have some interesting points of contact tomorrow. The sun really moves out of that in conjunct with Uranus, so I'm not really going to address it. All right, so let's get down. Let's start talking about some of this other stuff. Okay. So I'm going to go back because I've been putting this off for a while. Every week I save it to the end and I never do it. I've had some of this material around for a while. So I want to go to this now. I want to talk about these 400-year cycles and what happens with these 400-year cycles. And I found that the last 400-year cycle that we had, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And it was in Leo. We'll look at that, right? We're going to look at that one specifically. And then 400 years before that, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. So we're in these bookends, right? We're in these bookends with this one 400 years ago, and then one 400 years before that, and one 400 years out. So we're in this very interesting bookend. What's interesting about these Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions is that Wikipedia mentions them. They mention them on their Wikipedia page. So they think that it's noteworthy to mention these Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. Now, the one that we experienced in December of last year was super tight. It was on the dot, 0-0. They don't get much tighter than that, by the way. They really don't. The two that I'm going to show you are close, but they're not as close as that. And the one in 1223, which is one of the ones I'm looking at. The one in 1223 is supposedly one of the closer ones that they've recorded, and this one's super close. So I'm going to go back and I want to look at specifically the last super conjunction in this 400-year cycle, because I've run across a number of people on the internet who have tracked these 400-year cycles as they relate to climate. And it seems as though we go into a cooling phase when we hit these 400-year cycles. And I looked at it, and it kind of resonates here, especially those years where we have the super conjunction. And remember, last year, I mean, here in Texas, we went into snowpocalypse. I mean, it was super intense, really fucking intense. You know, the super conjunction, Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius, and by the time February rolls around, it's like, you know, the great tundra here. It was very intense. So there, you know, who knows? Maybe they're weather modding this stuff, right? Whatever. But still, it fits a pattern. All right. So I want to go back and I want to look at some of these cycles. All right. So this one that I have here lined up. So I can find it. And this isn't even the closest part. You know, really in this one, I was looking more at the Saturn-Uranus conjunction, which was also in play at the time. All right, so let me bring this up here. So this is 1623, which really puts it, I mean, I think we could probably go 1622 if we want to go back. But I was really interested in the Saturn-Uranus conjunction from this time. And the reason why the Saturn-Uranus conjunction interested me was that we're dealing with the sun here, right? So we're dealing with a contraction of the sun with Saturn in Leo. And then the Uranus conjunction would be something radical and different. We'd have a radical, new, and different relationship. It would usher in a radical, new, and different relationship with the sun during this time. And of course, we have a Jupiter Saturn conjunction taking place at that time as well. And I thought, well, this is pretty interesting, right? Like this, you know, if we look at this period where supposedly this phase happens, we go into a cold, dry phase during the 1600s. The Saturn-Uranus conjunction in Leo would be theoretically indicative of that. And also with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, it ushers in a new time. And this is what happens with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. They become the narrative for new time. And we saw that in 2000, you know, when we had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. You know, the narrative for the new time was really what was going to unfold after that, which really takes place in two very specific periods. Number one, 9/11/2001, and number two, what happens in 2009 with the crash of the housing market. Those are very, very important periods during that time. And you know, if you look at what happens with the housing market, I mean, that's a total Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. Taurus is about land, it's about security. You know, all these people buying like I'll never forget, man. One time this woman was cutting my hair. She was cool. She was from Mexico, but she was cool. And she's like, "Oh, I'm buying houses." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" "Oh, it is so easy to buy houses now. Do you want to buy a house with me?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? We could buy a house together." I mean, she didn't want to live with me, but she wanted to buy a house with me. And I'm like, oh. At that time, I wasn't really hip to what was going on with the housing thing. Like, I was so solipsistic in my own way. I had a good gig and everything, but I was just like, fuck, you know, I didn't know that I could qualify for buying a house during that period of time. I'm not even sure I would have wanted to. I mean, let's put it this way. I spent the prior 10 years of my life living off grid, on grid, if you know what I mean, right? I spent 10 years living off grid, on grid. So I'm not sure if the financial establishments were ready to roll out their red carpet based on my lack of status, shall we say? Okay. Well, I mean, I had a good gig. I had a .com gig. I was making good money. You know, if I had the status, I probably could have done it. Probably could have done with her, you know, because okay, let's go, let's do this. But that's what happened, right? You had everybody and their brother buying houses. I mean, you had bus boys. I swear to God, swear to God, you have bus boys buying houses during that time. And of course, they have these 2-year, no interest mortgages with the balloon that's about to pop 2 years out, and everybody's going to be screwed. That's all part of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. It becomes part of the narrative of the time, right? Part of the narrative. The Jupiter part is everybody's going to go out and buy a bunch of property, and all these negatively amortized mortgages are going to hit Saturn. Saturn's going to come a calling. And then all of a sudden it hits, right? Now we have Saturn. Now we're dealing with this housing crisis and all this money that's due, and people don't have the money and they're defaulting on their homes. And everybody except for the people that really needed to keep their homes got helped. That's all part of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. It's a big part of that narrative. Huge. Absolutely huge. Of course, we also have the demolition of the Twin Towers, the Twin Titans of finance and power. That was part of the narrative. Well, you can see this, right? We can see what's happening here. And then what happens, it's a huge money grab, because all these places get bailed out. All these people that made stupid, bad fucking bets, anybody that's not named Michael Burry gets bailed out pretty much. So that's when Pluto goes into Capricorn, and this is when the government becomes corporatocratic in a way that's never become corporatocratic. But it's all part of that story, and everything from that time until 2020 has been part of that story, part of Jupiter-Saturn conjuncting and dealing with things like assets and dealing with things like homes and dealing with things like the planet now has kind of entered into that discussion. The green agenda and the Paris climate and all those things that are associated with Taurus and constriction. And we're going to constrict. We're going to constrict your ability to use resources and materials, right? Oh, and Jupiter, we'll cook up another new financial scheme with Jupiter and Taurus. It'll be based on these credits, this carbon thing. And the more you plant, theoretically, you have more carbon credit. So that all happens during that conjunction, right? Now we come to Jupiter, Saturn, and we have the social fulfillment of that conjunction. This is what happens. It's like all those things, all the track, all the foundation, all the things I just talked about, all laid. And now we have Jupiter. Oh, now let's build up the rest of the prison. Because but on the other hand, what's also happening is that people they're awakening. People are bonding. They're forming groups. They're forming groups on Telegram and groups on Signal, and they're forming meetups. And I mean, this is a real interesting kind of shift in human consciousness, because that's where Jupiter and Aquarius come into play. So here we can see also. I'll go through some Wikipedia stuff. You're going to see some changes in monarchies here, right? You're going to see some changes in monarchies. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is when they celebrate the second Thanksgiving at Plymouth Rock. This is huge. You go back to earlier in the year, right? Jupiter and Saturn. This is about as close as I was really interested in that Saturn-Uranus conjunction. And what happens during that part of the story? That part of the story is theoretically a group of people leave Holland, right? Because they have their boats and all their English, but they leave Holland and they go to the United States, and that time America, and they're going to start a colony, and they're going to do it for whatever reasons the history books have told us, right? And it has a lot to do with getting out from under the yoke of the oppressive tax system, exploiting resources, to some degree practicing their faith. I think that's probably a tangential part of the story, not all of it. Who did they have? There was what was his name? The Englishman. What's his name? Oh fuck. He was the guy that was the badass. He'll come to me. Anyway, but that's the roots of moving away from this theoretical monarchical rule, with Saturn Uranus conjunction and Jupiter. This is the second year of the Pilgrims in Plymouth Rock. So I'm really just looking at like those planets in particular. Here we have Pluto in a very interesting place at 15 Taurus. So we see a square going on there, right? We see a square with Pluto, square with Saturn, square with Uranus. So they're going through these major cultural. And I also think, I would say, meteorological and solar shifts and having to deal with the Earth. And I'll show you that during that period, that 1623 period, it's a terrible year for the weather. Like, it's really bad. And you have, an overabundance of rain and cold weather, and the yields are terrible in 1623. And when you have a period where there's a really bad yield, especially back then, it takes a while to recover from that stuff. You'll lose people. Like, people don't understand this. We live in a supermarket world. We sort of go down and drive to the supermarket and get shit. But you have a bad year during a time like this, you'll lose people, right? People will get weak. People will die. People will starve. It's kind of a big deal. And if you can't like kickstart it again the next year, you're way behind the eight ball. And unless you have some reserves, it's a very challenging. So you have one bad year during this time could be really significant. So we can see some of this here with Pluto. And what do we have here? I mean, we have Uranus coming in and conjuncting Pluto from that time. I mean, if we're talking about timelines and time waves, it's kind of interesting, right? What do we have over here? Well, we've got Saturn right there getting ready to oppose the Uranus and Saturn and even Jupiter from earlier in that year, right? You have Saturn opposing that time. So we're connected to this 1623 time wave in what was going on there astrologically, and also in terms of things like the royalty, redefining what royalty is, putting more, there's expansion, obviously. There's still a lot of colonization happening, but you could tell that they're going through changes, especially with the colony in the United States, with Plymouth Rock. And also, I think there's something radical happening to the sun during that period. And it shows. Well, I'll show you the weather from that time. Right. So this is kind of where we are in terms of, the relationship with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. And I'm going to go back to 1223. I'm going to show you what was going on then too. All right, so let me show you what the weather was like then in 1623. I was actually able to find this. All right, here we go. So this is from the website weatherweb.net. It's pretty cool. As I was doing some research for this show tonight, I stumbled upon it. If you want to find out what was going on during any particular time, like, it'll show you. So it goes year by year. So what I'm really looking at, this is 1623 period. Here we have in 1607 as a precursor, the Great Winter, right? So in 1607, we have the Great Winter. Apparently trees died due to severity and length of the frost. Ships were stranded by ice several miles out. So this 400-year cycle for us really starts in 2017, 2018. But I was really looking at the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and that Saturn-Uranus conjunction. But this is it right here. You see this? This latter major concern is much commerce was done in these days via coastal shipping. In December, deep frost until mid-month, then a thaw until just before Christmas. Then from 21st December, OSP intense freeze for much of the time until at least January. Mid-January, ice formed on the Thames in London, sufficient to bear all sorts of sports, perambulations, and even cooking. The frost lasted overall for imagine that. The Thames was like frozen for 2 months. Much of the foregoing from Ian Curry, the severe weather lasted in parts of England until about 20th of February, OSP, though with variations in depth of cold. For example, in records from Kendall, Westmoreland, Cumbria, hard frost is noted from November 3rd, 1607 to March 6th. So this is a big, big cycle here. We go into, there's a lot of wetness during this time, and we go into 1623, which is when we see the beginning of this conjunction. So right here, 1622, although mixed data, it looks as if the late spring and much of the summer across Britain, but especially across Scotland and the north of England, was inclement, such that the harvest was poor in Scotland. Particularly the harvest was slated to be catastrophic. Reports suggest that the poor weather was primarily due to excessive rainfall. So we're in a cold, wet period here, right? It's usually cold, dry, warm, wet, but this is cold, wet. Due to excessive rainfall, see also previous summer. Reports from the winter, spring, and early summer of 1622, 1623 state that there was a great distress in the population of Scotland, with death rates much higher than normal. This was stated to be due to the famine prevalent, the poor harvest noted above. You see what I'm talking about? Right? These conditions will fucking just flatten societies back in the day. And, we have a very, very thin cushion in our world. It's getting thinner all the time, by the way. Okay. Presumably this was at least the second very poor year in a row. Had a lot to do with the lack of produce. August 18th, an extreme vehement storm struck the Tamar Valley. Know the details. So it really starts here, right? Starts here in 1607, which is the Great Winter. In 1623, we just have this terrible this terrible harvest period, right? 1622 to 1623, another poor summer in Scotland. You get hot and dry, which is terrible. Hot and dry. Should be hot and wet, cold and dry, and everything is, pretty much, 1625, you get a bit of a wet summer. But this is where it all starts. In this area right here, this 1622 is a really, in 23 is just a deadly time, right? Deadly time in terms of the weather. So we can see that these 400-year cycles start, so we come out of that 400-year cycle, which really starts around 1607. And in 2016, 2017, we begin to kind of move back into that 400-year cycle. And this would be what would be right here. It'd be 2007, 2008. That'd be the 400-year cycle. 2007, 2008. That makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways too, right? That makes a lot of sense because that's also when we go through all the bullshit with the housing crisis. So 2007, 2008 is the beginning of this 400-year cycle right here, the Great Winter. But the Great Winter really suffers its greatest damage here, 1622, 1623. Which is where we find ourselves in the cycle of these great conjunctions. So to me, this is interesting. And the great conjunction, especially during this one, with Saturn, Uranus, and Leo, and Jupiter and Leo, you're dealing with conditions that just aren't normal. I mean, just not normal, how is this thing going to be moving forward? Well, we'll be dealing with these squares. We're already dealing with Saturn Uranus square. That's ongoing, which is pretty significant, right? And I think we've even seen some changes climatologically as a result of that. Now, I think a lot of that is also geoengineered and manufactured. But what we're also seeing is the problem reaction solution with the climate. But I do think we are going into a GSM. It feels like it. It feels like we're going into a GSM. And I've been talking to people, Steve and Chris Crimmy, who are fantastic gardeners. I mean, these are people who are top-notch gardeners. Their yield just wasn't as good this year. And it was kind of cold and kind of wet, not normally as they didn't get the same kind of growing season they normally get in North Carolina. And they were very disappointed. The year before, they had a great season. Sometimes these things happen, right? But that's not the only thing. There's a place here called Lost Maples. And every year, Lost Maples has this fantastic explosion of autumn and fall. And, we have a lot of, maple trees, right? It's one of the few areas in Texas where they actually have maple trees, which the leaves will turn orange and red. And this year, man, they just didn't turn. Lost Maples didn't do its thing. Something happened, with those trees. And maybe it was the freeze the year before, but they're not in the same cycle that they normally are. So we're in a different cycle. And you throw the geoengineering stuff in, and it's going to either exacerbate it, accelerate it, but it's not going to change it in a way that's going to basically bring back the summer, the Garden of Eden times on the planet. I mean, and I'm not saying we can't have those again at a certain point, but the geoengineering is not engineered to do that. In fact, it's engineered to actually accelerate dimming, right? That's what it's there to do. So we're in this cycle now. We can see the roots of it. Definitely see the roots of it. Now, when we look at what was going on during that time, 1623, kind of an interesting period in history. We can go back to 1607. Also, we'll check that out, the start of the Great Winter. But let's look at 1623, and we'll bring that into the discussion, bring it into the mix. Okay. The first American temperance law is enacted in Virginia. So the Americans, the settlers are here. They're in the U.S. There's Jamestown, right? So we're dealing with this tidal shift of people who own land ultimately versus the people who owned the land, which for that point in time used to be monarchies, right? Monarchies owned the land. You were a vassal of the state. The ship Anne, July-December, arrives from England at New Plymouth Colony, carrying more settlers. Followed a week or two later by Little James. The Great Conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, right? Only arc 5 minutes apart. That's in July. So I really wanted to catch that Saturn-Uranus conjunction. We can see it right there. The Great Conjunction. This conjunction likely went unobserved, as it would have occurred near the sun. And the telescope had been invented only recently. So it's occurring near Leo because Saturn and Jupiter are in Leo during that time. So, of course, it's going to happen near the sun, right? So you can see that there. Okay. There was something else that happened. Where is it here? Oh, yeah. Zildjian begins the commercial manufacture of cymbals in Turkey. So if you guys are musicians and drummers, like Zildjian cymbals, they started all the way back in 1623. Think about that. The Zildjian Cymbal Company has been around since 1623 and are now in Massachusetts. Isn't that cool? Is there anything else here that's interesting? The second Thanksgiving is celebrated at Plymouth Plantation. I see. They call it a plantation now. Isn't that interesting? Oh, yeah. Those pilgrims, they were racist. They had a plantation. So you and we had a little plague breaking out there. So this gives you historical. This is interesting. This erotomania. This is a trip, right? So there's a psychiatric treatise, and it's called erotomania. So it's related to nymphomania, but a little bit different. So erotomania is if you have an obsession with somebody. That's kind of interesting. Like they came up with that label for people who have obsessions with people. They actually get into classic examples of erotomania. Let's see. You've got Ronald Reagan. His assassin was obsessed. He had an erotomanic fixation on Jodie Foster. Who else here? Oh, Michael David Barrett allegedly suffered from erotomania, stalking ESPN correspondent Aaron Andrews across the country and trying to see her and taking. So he would like look through her keyhole. He'd figure out where she was staying and try to take videos of her. He was obsessed with Aaron Andrews. Let's see, David Letterman and former astronaut Story Musgrave were both stalked by Margaret Mary Ray, who suffered from erotomania. That's a trip, right? Like like they figured that out in 1623, and they still have it, just like Zildjian's still making symbols. So I just wanted to show you, first of all, the weather is a really important thing to wrap your head around. That the Great Winter of 1607 lasts a long time, and that summer, it's a really bad summer. 1622, 1620, huge famine in Ireland, huge famine, and they don't really recover all that well from it, right? So we're in that cycle now, and I'm not necessarily saying that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is a part of that, but when I show you what was going on in 1223, and I'll show you the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction there and some of the weather that was going on there, it's really interesting. It's very, very interesting. All right, so let's take a look at 1223. So I just set this for England. Okay, so here we go. We can see our friends Jupiter and Saturn, and it was on March 4th, 1226, if I'm not mistaken. March 4th, 1226, and there we go. There they are, and they're in Aquarius. So, we could look back to 1226 and the current Jupiter-Saturn conjunction now and say that we're part of a very long cycle of time that starts then, has this midpoint with Jupiter, Saturn, and Leo, literally this kind of interesting opposition. It's not really a midpoint, but this opposition, but it's the midpoint between these two Aquarian conjunctions. And during that time, we've got Uranus and Scorpio, which is in opposition to Uranus and Taurus. Now, Uranus and Scorpio is evolutionary, which I've talked about before. You go back and you look at when Uranus was going into Taurus, all the cool shit is being made. Atari, Microsoft, Apple, they're all coming online. Now Uranus and Taurus and everything's becoming de-evolutionary. So this would point to an evolutionary cycle, even though here during this phase it's retrograde. And then we have Neptune in Taurus. So Taurus plays a role, right? The last time we had Pluto in Taurus, right around the same degree. Right around the same degree. Pluto in Taurus in 1623. Now we have Neptune in Taurus in 1223. And currently we have Uranus in Taurus. So all three of these cycles are connected to Taurus, which means we're going to have Earth changes. That's how the Taurus works out in the equation, right? We're going to have Earth changes. And Pluto and Taurus during that time, they were going through some very severe Earth changes. So let's take a look at the weather for 1223. And yes, people do keep track of the weather in 1223. Believe it or not, it's kind of cool. And we do have a bit of a record. So here we go. All right. So we have an exceptional series of great North Sea floods. That's all happening 1200 to 1219. Pretty significant, right? Massively. 2 consecutive wet years. Summer's thought to experience severe thunderstorms, notable hail in the London area. So heat and drought. That's going on. Year of heavy rains in London. So we really want to ramp up here. We want to get to another dry summer, the Great Fire in London, dry summer, cold winter in Western Europe. So here we go. 1224. So we're just coming out of 1223. right? A very wet year with much flooding, a great drought in winter. We have Neptune's in Taurus during this time. A great drought in winter. We have a bunch of flooding, a severe winter London. Difficult to know if these same events with this year are attributed to two events. Famine throughout Ireland this year, much sickness among men from various causes, cold, famine, every kind of disease. These are brutal times, man. Really, really brutal times. Long, severe frost from Christmas, 2nd of February. Severe winter in Western Europe. So this is all, I mean, you go back and you look at these cycles, there seems to be some correlation to these 400-year cycles. And in those 400-year cycles, we do see the great conjunctions. And 2 out of those great conjunctions are in Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius. We also see Taurus play a role in 3 of these periods in the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, and now Uranus. And it kind of like makes the circuit there, right? This, I'm not saying this would be the final, it would probably be close to one of the final. I mean, we had Uranus and Taurus, after World War, basically going into World War II, Uranus goes into Taurus. It comes out, we have Uranus and Gemini, and then they get to manufacture all the cool shit that they developed when Uranus was in Aries. If you go back, you look at Uranus and Aries pre-World War II, just about everything in the 20th century that's important is created then. Everything from X-rays to transistor radios to complex plastics and polymers. I mean, the whole kit and caboodle. It's all Uranus and Aries. The war comes along. They get to road test it a little bit. Of course, people are deprived economically when Uranus goes into Taurus. That's what happens. That's what happened during World War II. People deprived economically. Anybody really prospering besides the robber barons and the globalists and the industrialists in World War II? No, they weren't. They certainly weren't. There was a big fucking shortage of money during that period of time. Does it sound familiar? And it was global, right? It was a global event. So then Uranus goes into Gemini, and what do? They start to mass manufacture all the cool shit, and they get the Japanese to start manufacturing for them really cheaply. So we can see that there's clearly something going on here with these 400-year cycles. And these super conjunctions, I think, played a role. And especially the 3 that I'm talking about. Okay, so what was going on in the world in 1223? Well, I don't think they developed erotomania. I don't think they stumbled on that. Okay, let's look at it. It's not a lot of information around this year, but I'll tell you what they did. They were slaughtering a lot of Gnostics down in France during this time. These were the Albigensian Crusades. All right, so what do we have here? Got a lot of Mongol action during this time. The Mongols are feeling their oats during this period. Let's see. A lot happening in Russia, Mongol Empire, Russia, right? There's a lot of history there. Europe. Okay, so you have these crusades going on in Europe. Estonians revolt against Livonian brothers, sword in Denmark, blah, blah, blah. Right. So where do we see the damn it, I really thought that this was a period where they were getting into these Albigensian Crusades. I have to go back and look at it. So it looks like there's a hell of a lot more going on in Russia and Mongolia than there is Europe during this time. Where did I see that? Might have been the year after. Let's go back and look. Anyway, that's where the action's taking place, right there. Any interesting births? Not really. Alfonso the Fat died. Henry the Elder died. Mstislav the Old. So I guess you were known by fat, old, elder, but not tall. Well, at least not there. Okay. All right. So really it looks like things are happening in Eurasia. That's where the action is happening. So what do we have? We're like dark ages, right? We're definitely in the dark ages of Europe. So I just wanted to show you that these cycles, I feel, are connected. Like these 400-year cycles, these climate cycles are connected. You can certainly see that in 1607, 1608, and even extending out to 1623, where they have this terrible famine in Ireland, that it's part of this wave. And you can even see some of that again in 1223, these 400-year cycles. And I just so happened to stumble upon these great conjunctions that happened during these cycles. And 2 out of those 3 happen to be in Aquarius, which is a cold sign. You know, Aquarius is a cold sign. And who knows, maybe with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Leo back in 1623, it might have heated up. But with Uranus there, which is the ruler of Aquarius, right, maybe it creates a different kind of resolution. It doesn't resolve itself in the same way, right? So it's a very interesting period that we're in. So this would be ultimately an 800-year cycle from 1223, 1623, and I guess 2020, because that's when we had this great conjunction. So, and I guess we'll have a version of the conjunction in 2022 with Jupiter Neptune coming into play. That'll be interesting, I think, from a spiritual perspective. And who knows, we might get a lot of flooding too during that time with Jupiter Neptune. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we did. Okay, so there we go, right? I've been talking about this for the last few weeks. And if we can see these 400-year cycles, and we can also see how Taurus plays a role in each of these cycles, and it has Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, that there have been earth changes. And those earth changes have led to things like migrations and have done a lot of, led to obviously fatalities, mortalities, and people having to learn how to endure and get through times. So if we're going through that now, okay, and we're part of this cyclical reenactment, and people who understand these things historically, perhaps astrologically, what do they do with that information? How do they tweak the narrative and the program? How do they do that? Well, maybe they create something like climate change, because they know that we have these cyclical patterns and has very little to do with things like carbon and carbon output. They just know that we're going to go through climate change. And if you go back and look, when does Al Gore start spewing that shit? Early 2000s, am I right? Like after he loses, I think it's around 2003, 2004, he starts to talk about global warming, although really what they should be talking about is a global freezing or global dimming, but that doesn't conjure up enough fear. That doesn't conjure up enough fear. They have to conjure the fear of melting ice caps and polar bears in Florida, things like that. But then they can morph it and rebrand it to climate change, which is what they've done. They don't talk about global warming anymore. They talk about climate change, and climate change can be anything. And they know that we live in a cyclical pattern of these phases and cycles so they can create a crisis around it. And then they can navigate and drive that crisis any way they want to drive it. And I think that that's what's happening. And it all started off with this Jupiter Saturn conjunction, and really Saturn moving into Aquarius and the greater good. And we're moving on from this contagion to climate. I mean, it's going to happen. They will move from contagion to climate. They have to make this, they have to make this brand pivot in order to keep a narrative going. So we're getting ready to move out of the contagion phase. I'm just telling you, it's going to happen. Even though there are people around the world who are looking at hardcore penalties, by January, we're moving into a new phase because it is the end of the Janus ritual. And that narrative will be in the background. It will not be in the foreground. There will be a new narrative. And the narrative will more than likely be the one that I'm talking about, and maybe spiced up with a little bit of global war and conflict, because Russia's now moving into Donbass and they're retaking Donbass. And I would not be surprised if Russia and China move on Ukraine and Taiwan simultaneously. I would not also be surprised if Israel decides that they're going to go after Syria. I don't think they're going to go after Iran. I don't think Israel wants to go after Iran. I don't think that's. There are a lot. I got to tell you, there are a lot of very rich Jews that live in Iran. Very rich, super rich. Okay, I don't think Israel wants to go after Iran. I think they want to go after Syria. I would not be surprised if that happens. And they've been going into Syria. They've been bombing Syria. They just say, "Oh, the Iranians are over there," and we just, we hate the Iranians. So we have three major hotspots: Taiwan, Ukraine, and the Middle East. And I think that would be because the gas is running out on the carjack. It's just the gas is running out on the carjack, and there are too many people that are looking around and they're looking at things that are happening to people they know and they love, and they are really upset, befuddled, betrayed. That's happening. Okay, they cannot control that narrative. They cannot control that. They're going to have to go to a different narrative. So they can run that as a subscript, but they can't run it the whole time. They can't. They have to move on to the climate. The climate's going to be the next thing. They have to do it. They have to go into this. And I'll go back to let me do this. Let me shift into the Treaty of Versailles, because it gets into this whole thing around reparations, which is what Germany had to repay during World War I. And I feel like that's what's going to happen to the West, and primarily the United States, and that the United States are going to have to essentially repay this bizarre kind of debt to the world for what it's done to the climate. I feel like this is coming, and they can do it. They can slice and dice this any way they want to, right? They can regulate, they can attach certain taxes, certain regulations, certain fees, and it all adds up to like one big bundle of reparation, because this country theoretically has been the greatest climate marauder on the planet. I can totally see that. All right, so let's take a little trip back to the treaty of Versailles. This is really an important piece, at least in my world and in my head, because it sets the stage for the 20th century. It's a really, really, really big deal. And I'm just going to click on this for a little bit, because I've been spending a lot of time with World War I and really looking at World War I as being the first part of a triptych. You have the First World War, the Second World War, and the Third World War. And I would say that we are currently in the Third World War, but it's a very different kind of war. It's not the same wars that they fought during those two wars. Fifth generational warfare, dealing with things like frequencies and sounds and mass psychology, chemicals, neurotoxins, moving people around, in terms of groups and, relocating them, weaponizing migration, things like that, right? Weaponizing identity, weaponizing sexuality, weaponizing your basic standard moral values against the family. These are all part of fifth generational warfare tactics. So we can learn something from the first war, and we can learn something from the second war, and how we're drawn into these conflicts. Number one, but what happens in the aftermath of these outcomes, and particularly World War One. So let's look at the Treaty of Versailles, and so it is signed on 28th of January. Sorry, 20th of June. And it is effective on the 10th of January, 1920. I have both those charts, by the way. We're going to look at them. They're interesting, and I'll give you my take as to why they're interesting. And really, what it comes down to here is there are these 14 points, and I'm going to show you what the 14 points are. And even the 14 points turn the 20th century on its ear. So here we have the treaty required Germany to disarm, make ample territorial concessions, and pay reparations to certain countries that had formed the Entente powers. In 1921, the total cost of these reparations was assessed at 132 billion gold marks, then 31.4 billion, or 6.6, isn't it interesting, billion in pounds, roughly equivalent to the US 442 billion, UK 284 billion in 2021. So Germany at that time had to dish out, just think if the United States had to dish out $442 billion, which it might, by the way. Like those could be climate change reparations. Although it would be 442 billion, it would be, I don't know, 100 billion. Sure, why not? Just think about that. Germany had to dish out the equivalent of $442 billion. Think about that. They fucked them up, right? At the time, economists, notably John Maynard Keynes, a British delegate to the Paris Peace Conference, predicted that the treaty was too harsh, a Carthaginian peace, and said the reparations figure was excessive and counterproductive. Views that since then have been the subject of ongoing debate by historians and economists. On the other hand, prominent figures on the Allied side, such as French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, criticized the treaty for treating Germany too leniently. What the fuck did you want to do? Burn them at the stake? I mean, you've taken everything from them. The result of these competing and sometimes conflicting goals among the victors was a compromise that left no one satisfied. In particular, Germany was neither pacified nor conciliated. So they did all this on their own, by the way, and they did it at the Hall of Mirrors, which is in the Palace of Versailles. This is where, Louis had his golden toilet, or his golden throne that he used to crap on, and Marie Antoinette. This was the splendor of Versailles, and this is where they had this this meeting of these people they're going to determine Germany's fate. Germany was not allowed to be there, by the way. They could not make a case for themselves. They were basically said, look, you lost the fucking war. You come over here when we're done and we'll tell you what happened. The Germans were shocked. And it was non-negotiable, by the way. It was totally non-negotiable. I mean, if I was the Germans, I'm like, fuck you, we're going back to war. I mean, that's what I would say. I would go back to the people and say, look, this is what they plan on doing. Do we want that? Let's go. But they took it, right? They took it. And the reason they took it is they had no leadership. The Germans had lost their king, right? They'd lost their king. They had nobody to lead them. He was in exile. He was in Austria, growing rose bushes or some shit like that. The Kaiser Wilhelm. They had no leadership. They had nobody to say, hey, fuck these people. We're not going to pay it. They were gutted. They were just gutted, bottomed out. All right, so let's keep going here. It says, although it is often referred to as the Versailles Conference. Oh, here, let me go. This is it. The treaty has sometimes been cited as a cause for World War II. Absolutely was a cause for World War II. Although its actual impact was not as severe as feared, its terms led to great resentment in Germany, which powered the rise of the Nazi Party. The Nazis were like, fuck you. You guys fucking ripped us off. We're having to pay all these reparations. The Weimar Republic was socially, morally bankrupt. I'm not making a case for Hitler, by the way. I just got to be clear about that. I'm just telling you how this stuff happens. And they basically appealed, they being the Nazi Party, appealed to the public's resentment and humiliation and said, we're going to restore your national pride. This is what we're going to do. And we're going to get back at the people that levied this debt upon us. And then you go through World War II, and guess what? They have to pay more reparations. Germany's been in debt since the end of World War I. Constant paying out of monies for aggrieved parties. So here we go. These are the 14 points. And the 14 points are the game changers of the 20th century. Now, this clown, Woodrow Wilson, who's completely compromised, he's a Capricorn. He was really what he was. He was a college professor who was vain. He'd been discovered by Colonel Mandel House and the East Coast establishment, and they promoted him as president. He became president. They also knew that he was compromised. He was having an affair, so they held that against him, right? He did what they wanted him to do, and he theoretically had these weird ideals of kind of this socialistic utopian society. So it didn't really, matter all that much. Although later on in his life, he realized he'd made a terrible error. He had basically sold out the American people, and that's a heavy burden to deal with. So he's a Capricorn, and the principles were outlined in January 8, 1918. I think the day before that, Lloyd Warner from England basically said, this is what we want, this is what we need. And so you had these two competing kinds of voices. It's interesting because it's right around that January period. We had January 6th here in 2020, right? Or I'm sorry, 2021. We had January. It just seems like not that. Wow. I mean, time is just weird. It's really weird. Very weird. Like I can't even like believe that I've been in this house. I got here in June, so like 6 months. I've been here 6 months, and I started the year off in a different place, and it feels like the beginning of the year was years ago. I swear to God, it feels like it was years ago. Like January 6th feels like, I don't know, the 2010s now. It's very strange. Time is a very strange thing. Anyway, so you have the Treaty of Versailles happening kind of right around the same time we have this January 6th kind of debacle where there's this changing of the guards, which is really, what January 6th was. It was a changing of the guards. It was the changing of a new order in a new time, and trying to stigmatize what had taken place during that time in order for this new order to take root so that the old order could be extinguished and or abolished. Same thing is here. Let's look at Wilson's 14 points. And they're really kind of mind-blowing. It's only 14, but some of these are, I'm only going to take two out of, so I'm going to take two of these. Actually, I'll take three. And I'm going to show you what a big deal they are in terms of the 20th century. This is coming on the heels of the Bolshevik Revolution. So Russia at this point in time is now ruled by Stalin. Actually, not quite. Russia is still ruled by Lenin. 1919, 1920. Stalin takes over a little bit later after Lenin has an aneurysm. But they're there, right? They're there. And the same guys that are running the Treaty of Versailles are the same guys that ran the Bolshevik Revolution. This is really the mind. This is the mind fuck, right? They ran the Bolshevik Revolution, and now they're running this. So here's what they have to say about Russia. The evacuation of all Russian territory. So that means that if Germany had any footprint in any Russian territory, they had to leave. And such a settlement of all questions affecting Russia as will secure the best and freest cooperation of the other nations of the world in obtaining for her being Mother Russia, her an unhampered and unembarrassed opportunity for the independent determination of her own political development and national policy, and assure her of a sincere welcome into the society of free nations under institutions of her own choosing, and more than a welcome, assistance also of every kind that she may need and herself desire. I mean, they're talking about Russia like, like it's this, virgin bride or something. The treatment accorded to Russia by her sister nations in the months to come will be the acid test of their goodwill, of their comprehension of her needs as distinguished from their own interests, and of their intelligent and unselfish sympathy. So meanwhile, Russia is slaughtering millions of people, but right here in point 6 of the 14 points, don't worry about it. You just got to let Russia develop on its own. How is that not sociopathic in gaslighting? This is major gaslighting here. Not only that, but you have to help them. You've got to give them everything that they need or want. This is one of the 14 points, right? And it's not just Germany. This is what's going to follow from this, which is the League of Nations. They're trying to create the first form and version of global governance. Now, Calvin Coolidge will come along and he will not sign the League of Nations. He's like, no, not signing it. Sorry, that was your thing. I'm not going to do it. So they didn't quite get there. They had a few speed bumps in the United States, but trust me, this is what they wanted, and they wanted to make sure that no matter what Russia did, no matter how bloody, how heinous, how macabre and inhuman those slaughters and sacrifices that took place happened, you just wanted to wrap your arms around Russia and give them whatever you wanted. That is a big deal. And this gives Russia the pretext basically to do whatever the fuck they want. Okay? And it's not great. That's a big one. All right, here's another one that is taken and becomes a very big flashpoint for the 20th century. It's point 5, a free and open-minded and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based upon strict observance of the principle that in determining all such questions of sovereignty, the interests of the population concerned must have equal weight with equitable government whose title is to be determined. Okay, so if countries that have been colonialized, and they're all colonialized at that time, they're reading this and they're saying, thank God, thank you, Wilson, for doing this, because we want our fucking country back. We want this territory back. So this is the beginning of colonial unrest. They're starting to put this into motion, right? They're putting this shit into motion because the same guys that were running the Bolshevik Revolution are putting this together, and they want to foment chaos and crisis and revolution in as many places as possible. Because why? Ordo ad chao, out of order chaos. and they're going to be able to take advantage of that. And so this was a big deal. Number 5 was a big deal, and they said it was misunderstood by these colonial countries, especially in South America, Latin America. Okay, so here's the big one down here. The Turkish portion of the Ottoman Empire should be assured and secured sovereignty. Okay, so they're saying basically, all right, Turkey, you're going to have your little your patch of real estate. You'll get that, but the Ottoman Empire is over. It's over. We're ending that. You get some land here, you get this portion, but all the other stuff, that's going away. This is where they plan to basically mandate Palestine. This is all part of the 14 points. Okay, but the other nationalities which are now under Ottoman rule should be assured an undoubted security of life and absolutely unmolested opportunity of autonomous development, and the Dardanelles should be permanently open as a free passage to ships and commerce of all nations under international guarantee. So basically they're saying, okay, we're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. We're going to take land away from Turkey, because Turkey had an alliance with, the Ottoman Empire had an alliance with Germany, but they weren't as hard on Turkey as they were on the Germans. But they got land. And one of the reasons why they got land, why? There's oil there. They knew there was oil there. And they got Palestine for mandate Palestine. That was all part of the deal. Because the Zionist Congress went in and basically said, look, we'll bring the Russians, we'll bring the Americans into the war. You guys will win. And when that happens, you got to give us Palestine. That was part of the deal. That was part of the deal. And the Americans were not in the war. They didn't want to be in the war. They were isolationists. It's not our war, right? And then they sunk Lusitania, and guess what? The Americans are in the war. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about here. Let me see. Wilson's speech regarding the 14 points led to unintentional but important consequences in regards to countries which were under European colonial rule or under the influence of European countries. And many of the 14 points, specifically points 10, 11, 12, and 13, Wilson had focused on adjusting colonial disputes and the importance of allowing autonomous development and self-determination. This drew significant attention from anti-colonial nationalist leaders. In movements, we saw Wilson's swift adoption of the term self-determination, although he did not actually use the term in the speech itself, as an opportunity to gain independence from colonial rule or expel foreign influence. Consequently, Wilson gained support from anti-colonial nationalist leaders in Europe's colonies, countries under European influence around the globe, who were hopeful that Wilson would assist them in their goals. Around the world, Wilson was occasionally elevated to a quasi-religious figure as someone who was an agent of salvation and a bringer of peace and justice. During this Wilsonian moment, there was considerable optimism among anti-colonial nationalist leaders and movements that Wilson and the 14 points were going to be an influential force to reshape the long-established relations between the West and the rest of the world. Many of them believed that the United States, given its history, particularly by the American Revolution, would be sympathetic towards the goals and aspirations they held. A common belief among anti-colonialist nationalist leaders, once that assisted them in gaining independence from colonial rule or foreign influence, would establish new relationships which would be far more favorable and equitable than what had existed. Sorry. Thanks for playing. That didn't happen at all. But that's what they thought. And that's where this desire to break free of colonialism really takes root. It takes root in the post 1918, 1919, 1920, and becomes a big part of the 20th century. And I'm not saying that should have been on the table, right? I mean, it should have been clearly it should have been on the table, but it was like, okay, we'll open that door and we'll bring in a lot of chaos and we'll watch this chaos unfold and we'll take full advantage of it. They being the people that wrote the Treaty of Versailles, the 14 points, and the same people that ran the Bolshevik Revolution. Same people. It's the same people, right? Wilson didn't write that shit. He was just an errand boy. And that's what ultimately Germany had to agree to. So what do the charts for that period look like? And what can we learn from them? So this is the first chart right here. This is the 28th of June, 1919. Right here, we have 12:01 p.m. And we can see usually that's usually when they sign these treaties, right around noon. I've come to see this now. You can see here we've got a new moon in Cancer, Pluto in Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer, Sun in Cancer. A lot of Cancer. That is a lot of Cancer. Wouldn't you say? I would say. We have Mars in Gemini at the top of the chart. So remember, where are they doing this? The Hall of Mirrors, right? And Mars is in Gemini. South Node is in Gemini, the Hall of Mirrors. So there's a lot of, obfuscation around information. Like Germany's not left in the loop of this at all. Not at all. And here we've got Mars right at the top of the chart at 12:01 in Gemini. And it's like, yeah, we fucked you. We fucked you. You thought you would get by. No, we fucked you. And you have all of this Leo energy, Neptune, Venus, Saturn, the two asteroids, Juno and Vesta, and they're all 11th house, right? So what they're really trying to do here is they're trying to in this moment in time, they're trying to create the League of Nations. This is what they're trying to do. And you can see this with all these planets in the 11th house. They want to have a new royalty, a new elite, Leo, hello, right, in the 11th house. And this is what is leading this whole procession of Cancer. And when I see all this Cancer, ultimately, this is going to be money and assets and resources. Chiron is in Aries, right? Even though Chiron wasn't around then, they didn't know about it, but it was in Aries at 6 degrees, pretty close to where it is now. And we'll see Chiron and Aries show up again in the following year when the treaty itself is enacted. So you have this very, the thing with Cancer too, and I know that there are some Cancerian people out there. Please don't take this the wrong way, okay? But let's just say Cancer, and I've said this before, Cancer is really good with the buck. And when you see all of this Cancerian energy just kind of accumulate and conglomerate, right? You're thinking, oh yeah, I see what they're doing here. Yeah, they're really like sucking up all these resources, and they're painting a picture here, kind of a very Cancerian picture, of what they're going to do with those resources. Again, theoretically. But to me, the big story is what's going on in the 11th house. They are here to create the League of Nations, and this is like the template for that. And with Mars and Gemini at the top of the chart, it's shifty. And Mars and Gemini was part of this whole negotiation, right? It's shifty, it's mercurial, it's cunning, and it's cutting. It's really cutting. And the only thing that we have here is this square to Chiron. Well, what sign is it in? It's in Aries. And, what is Hitler associated with? Oh, he's associated with the Aryan race, right? And, this whole Aryan thing. And we've got all these, it's a sacrifice. You can see it right here. Pluto square Chiron, Sun square Chiron. They're going to bleed this thing. And guess what? This Chiron's going to get activated. That's exactly what's going to happen. So we see this kind of rise of Aries as it relates to the Third Reich. And it's because of this. You can see it right there astrologically. It's right there, right? Germany is wounded, fucking wounded. They lose their power. they lose their identity. And if you go back and you look at like what happened in World War I, after the war was over, the fucking French and Germans are dancing around. They're dancing with each other, drinking champagne. Like they were all relieved. They were all so tired of the fucking war. Okay. They were tired of it. And then they could have had an armistice way before this. They could have negotiated, and they were close. They were close until the Zionist Congress stepped in. And I'm telling you, this is what happened. And they got the Americans involved. And once they got the Americans involved, it was going to be. And by the way, this is also when the Spanish flu is happening. Think about that. They got a Spanish flu piggyback on top of this shit, right? This is a big time. It changes everything. Completely changes everything. And out of the excess of the Treaty of Versailles and the 14 points and how much Germany has to pay back, we have the rise of Hitler and the Nazis in World War II. It's all right there. The seeds are right there. And what they're trying to do is set up this League of Nations and this global governance, and they fail. They fail. It doesn't happen. And that's because Calvin Coolidge doesn't play ball. And Calvin Coolidge takes over for, who is it, Harding, who winds up dying on him. Okay, so let's look at one more chart here for, this is, that was the, there's another chart. Here, it's right here. No, that's the 1623 chart. All right. Let me go back in here. Okay. Okay. All right. I think we're going to skip Ursula von der Leyen because she has an incredibly boring chart, unless you consider a massive stellium in Libra interesting. I just had this damn thing. Where is it? Let's do this. Yeah, all right. Let's do this. Just going to change this. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go here. Okay, so it's going to be January 10, 19, 20, 12:01 p.m. Versailles. So this is when everything kicks in. And it's a very, very different chart. I'll show you. And the iron clamp comes down. Capricorn sun, 18 degrees, for 12:01 conjunct to midheaven. We've got Taurus on the ascendant, South Node in Taurus. So the nodes are reversed here. And, before we had this very strong kind of concentration on sort of healing the world with all that Cancerian energy and resources, and we're going to take it, we're going to do something I don't know, positive when they feed the world, whatever the fuck they were going to use the money for in their minds. I know what they were going to use it for. Anyway, and then of course the 11th house, which was going to be, their League of Nations. But it turns out to be very, very different here when it's actually enacted. Now you have Capricorn lording over this chart, right? Which is a hard taskmaster. Like, this is now what Germany has to endure. And under the guise of like so-called fairness, we have this Mars square to Pluto. I'm sorry, Mars square to Libra, Mars square to the Sun. And that ultimately is going to be problematic, because what is Germany going to want to do? Balance the scales. It's exactly what they're going to want to do. And who are they going to balance the scales against or want to? The bankers, Taurus on the ascendant, Capricorn, right? The global powers, the global elites, and boom, right here, you're seeing it. You're seeing exactly what's going to happen with this Mars Sun square. Exactly what's going to happen. What's going to take place. The true node is in Scorpio. So what are they doing, man? They're siphoning off this money, right? This is a power move, big time power move. And it ultimately does not sit well. Venus in Sagittarius, which is supposed to be about, freedom and relationships that have kind of this higher purpose, higher purpose with a party attitude. Venus in Sagittarius is like I don't know. It's like a mullet, I think. No, it's not really like a mullet, but it could be. Anyway, we have Venus in Sagittarius, but it is supposed to be, more high-minded, right? It's more about the philosophical ideals and principles. You ever been in a relationship with somebody who has Venus in Sagittarius? They'll fucking tell you exactly what they're thinking. They will tell you exactly what and a lot of times they'll be right. You may not want to hear it. They'll be right. They will not hold back. And people, Venus and Sagittarius can be fun to be around. They'd be very lively, very spirited, but man, they have very little filter. A lot of cases, very little filter. This just goes to the territory, right? If you're on the right side of it, it's all good. If you're on the wrong side of it, look out. But here, it's a big fail. We see the square to Saturn. That's not going to work. We see the square here to Uranus. Like, that's not going to work either. That you see the fomentation of rebellion here. It's not fair and equitable at all. And there's a dark shadow that's cast over this chart with Black Moon Lilith there. And one of the things that Sagittarius will often sort of bump into from time to time is like, it's a sign that can be associated with, bigotry and spiritual and religious elitism. Like, is that part of this whole story too? Is that how this is going to evolve? Obviously, the victors here, which get to write the history books, you got a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction down at the bottom of the chart. They're going to be fine. They're going to do just fine with those resources. But the people, you've got this Mars square to the Sun and this Venus T-square. It's not quite a T-square, but it's close, with Uranus and Saturn. And it's not going to be just. It's not going to be equitable. It's not going to be fair. Venus in the 7th house should be fair. It's not. They have this shadow that's hanging over this thing. And then you have the inconjunct going on with Pluto, and somebody's going to have to pay, right? Somebody's going to have to pay, whether it's the Germans or the people that made the reparations on the Germans. They're going to have to pay. And it's a real fuck story for the Germans, because then after World War II, they got to pay more reparations. And I'm not even sure they were able to repay the shit that went down in World War I. I don't know if they were on the books for that. And now they've got to repay what happens after World War II. So it's a country that has literally been in debt. And I think they stopped paying the reparations. I could be wrong. I think they've paid off the last Holocaust. But you think about it. I mean, this is happening from, and I'm not sure, if Hitler shut it down. I'd have to go back and look. But that reign isn't very long. I mean, he takes over, in the 20s, like the late 20s. Like the National Socialist Party takes over like the late 20s. So there may have been a period there where they stopped paying. They're like, fuck you. We're not going to pay. We're going to take that money. We're going to build tanks or whatever. Right. I mean, I think that kind of happened. And then the war happens and they start paying again. That's my sense. I'd have to look it up. But you can see here that the roots for World War II are in this chart, right? They're in the other chart too with Chiron and Aries. You know, here's Chiron at 2 degrees, squaring Pluto right there, bang, right? Squaring Mercury. These people are pissed. They're totally pissed. Chiron went retrograde. It was at 6 and now it's at 2. It's at the beginning of Aries, which is a very intense and powerful aspect here. And it's in the 12th house. So it's in chrysalis, right? This thing is going to hatch. It is definitely going to hatch. And that's what happens. That's exactly what happens. Okay. I think we're done for tonight. For those of you who are into the idea of cryptocurrency. Now, I want to say something about cryptocurrency. The way that I look at cryptocurrency is I don't look at cryptocurrency as a get rich quick scheme. I've never looked at it that way. If I had, I probably would have invested a lot more money. You know, I was aware of Bitcoin when it broke. I'm like, yeah, maybe I should figure out how to get some of this shit. Oh, let me go down and have a couple of shots of tequila. Let me go think about that. And that didn't really work out very well. So I'm not necessarily interested in looking at cryptocurrency as a get rich quick scheme. It's not going to go away. And we had a big sell off last week, Friday night. It was kind of a bloodbath. And they go through these cycles, or they go through these. Now it'll probably top off by maybe 10%. I don't know. But they'll have these troughs, the whales will sell, and then they'll go back up again, right? But it's not going to go away. I can tell you that right now. So I've been in and out and playing around with crypto for a while, but anything really serious. Like I'm not a day trader, and I've made a little bit of money. I wouldn't say, oh man, look, I use this money to buy a house. Really, nothing like that. But I do feel like if we're going to go into a period where the dollar is going to go into the shitter, and it more than likely will, and especially if we have to theoretically pay for climate reparations, which I think is probably going to be how this thing is framed up, by the way. They won't say it quite like that, but that's the way it will be. By the way, there could be also other reparations too, right? We haven't even gone down what's the word I'm looking for? Systemic racism shoot with reparations. Like that's still kind of out there and on the table. But the climate reparations, I think, are almost fait accompli once they go down that path. So that said, we're going to witness something I think pretty dramatic happen to the dollar. And I am a firm believer that you need some hedges, but you need the right hedges, and you need to know what to do and what you theoretically can count on and how you can preserve your assets. And so Masaki and I are doing a webinar this weekend, and it's a kind of an A to Z thing. It's cryptocurrency for beginners. And I am not a financial advisor, although I do understand some astrological cycles, but I am pretty clear that people are going to need to hedge some assets. So we've got this webinar that we're teaching on Friday and Masaki, Saturday and Sunday. And I'll show you, it's right here. Oh, pardon me. Man, I had some pasta tonight with some wheat. I never eat wheat pasta. And let me tell you, man, it affected me. It totally affected me. Okay, so here is the cracking the code, crypto A to Z. And it's going to be myself and Masaki. So day 1, 12/11/21, 12 noon to 3 p.m. CST. And then that whole day is going to be devoted to a private ledger, what it is, how to set it up, And Masaki will walk us through that, right? So if you get a private ledger, which is really important, you need one. You don't want your assets on an exchange. You don't want them on your cell phone. You don't want them on your computer, right? So this is a big part of setting this whole thing up. We're going to talk about, blockchain. How does it work? What is it? What is a blockchain? Some people don't understand what that is. What is a crypto coin token? What's an exchange? How does it work with your bank account? Is it safe? Setting up your own private ledger, right? And then the concept of linking it to an exchange. We're not going to actually do that. We're going to show you how to do it. Altcoins, shit coins, private coins. We're going to go through all the various coins. Right, so that's all on day one, and then on day two, we go to the future of this, freak show. What is a synthetic asset? What is staking, farming, NFTs? And again, I am not here to promote. I'm not a wildcat when it comes to this stuff. Okay, some people are, and Masaki is a bit more of a wildcat than I am, but I am here to try to help people find something that's reasonable, that makes sense. So if shit goes off the rails, right? You have the right, 2 or 3 or 4 digital assets that you've got stored away on your private ledger so that if you need to, you can use them and trade outside the system, and that their value will increase exponentially as the value of the dollar decreases. Okay, now you don't have to go hog wild, right? You don't have to spend $10,000. Like, you could probably spend something like $1,500 on something if you spend it on the right thing. And if the dollar, goes through the floor and inflation goes through the ceiling, what's going to happen to your cryptocurrency? It's going to go up, and you're going to need something like that for a hedge. I'm just telling you, it's not the only hedge, but it's a hedge. So we're doing this this weekend, and you can sign up here on my website right there. And it's $110 for 2 days. I think it's a pretty good deal because you're going to get a lot of solid advice and a lot of really basic soup to nuts stuff. Okay. We're going at this like, we want people that don't know a lot about this so that we can help them, show them. And actually, for me, I will be a voice of reason and being conservative in this world. Okay. I'm not here to tell you you're going to find something and shoot the moon and go for it. No, that's not how I think of this, right? I think of this as a potential for a hedge, just like you would have any other hedge. And you can't afford to invest something that you won't be willing to lose. That's really important, okay? Really important. So I am not here to promote a get-rich-quick scheme. If anything, we're just going to try to show you what this world is so that you're not mystified by it. If you want to interact with it, you'll have the tools and you'll understand some of the landscape and some of the things that can make your relationship with cryptocurrency and digital currency more user-friendly and create another hedge for yourself. That's why we're doing this. Okay. So it's there. It's on my website, 15 Minutes of Flame. You'll see it right at the top. Crack the code. I think it's on Masaki's website too. Okay. All right. I think we're out of here. Thanks for being here. We'll be back tomorrow with 15 Minutes of Flame over on the 15 Minutes of Flame channel. As always, it's a great pleasure and honor to hang out with you on a Sunday night. And where are we? There we are. Okay. All right, everybody. Take good care. All right. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to stay in what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You are you. And for myself and the Astro Cat, have a great week. Make some magic. Fuck with the world and make some magic. Okay. Bye for now.